So in this tutorial view, I'm going to talk about other 3D programs that you can use in conjunction with View. Those two programs that I specifically use the most is World Machine 2, and this is the website for it. Basically what they have is just what any other vendor would have, you know, try to get you to buy it, can make it sound all pretty and wonderful and everything like that, as well as you know, testimonials. You can get the latest updates, stuff like that. I guess World Machine 2.3 is the open beta is available. I have World Machine 2.2, so also for Mac users, I believe it's available for Mac users now. Don't quote me on that. You're just gonna have to download it and find out. The other one is Geo Control 2, or just Geo Control, whichever one you have. Both World Machine and Geo Control, the first versions, will work just fine. You might miss some different settings, but other than that, there's really, like, if you have the money to get both of them, I would highly recommend it. They both have free versions. They're limited, of course. They're limited in resolutions and special effects as well. So I would recommend just downloading the free ones, seeing if you like them, and then if you like them, then buy them. That's what I did. Other than that, Geo Control 2 is available for Mac users as well, so you're not completely left out of the loop. So the first thing I'm going to do in this one is go ahead and make a terrain in both of the programs, show you how you would usually go about doing it, and different things that you can do in it. And then importing in the View and then rendering it out in View with a really pretty atmosphere or plants or anything like that. And this might be a little bit longer of a tutorial, but I'm hoping that it'll help people understand that there's other options out there that they can use in their portfolio. So I'm going to go ahead and close this, and then I'm going to go ahead and open up World Machine 2. I'm just going to start with this one. Show you how to generally use it. For those who have been using World Machine for a very long time, please note that I usually only use World Machine for very quick and simple renders. I don't really go into detail in it. So if you want some advanced training in World Machine 2, I'd recommend visiting their website. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to go in World Machine. Everything is set up as nodes. It's basically like the function editor in View. It's purely the function editor, but as a node. And what you would usually start out with inside World Machine is these are different tabs up you can choose, and the first one would be natural. Not natural, because that's a wholly different thing. We're going to start with generator. Sorry, you're going to start with generator. Inside generator, they have other options that you can choose from to help to get a basic shape for a terrain. What you would usually want to start with is advanced Perlin, and it's just like in View. View has its Perlin fractals as well as World Machine, and when you put it in, it's randomly generated, and this is the node you have, and has all these different connectors on it. And don't get overwhelmed by them. Sometimes you would be able to use these different options on the node. Most of the time you won't, unless you use World Machine purely, you know, like you would in View. And they all have their advantages and disadvantages and everything like that. But for this tutorial, since it's only very basic inside World Machine, we're not going to mess with any of these right now, and we're just going to go and stick with what we have right now. When you lay a node out on the field on this big open gray area, what you want to do is click on it, and it'll highlight itself like this. It'll get these little bars that surround it, and then when you hover the mouse over it, it'll actually get a yellow outline on it. So that just telling you that you have it selected or you're over it. Go ahead and double click on it, and it'll bring up the advanced Fractal Perlin generator. And here you have different options, and there's quite a bit of stuff in here. Don't get overwhelmed by it. A lot of people get overwhelmed by node-based world generators, and they get scared over it. But take it slow, take it very simple, and you will you'll eventually get a hang of it. What you want to do is just go from left to right. You can start anywhere you want, of course, but I would recommend going from left to right. What we're going to talk about is the feature scale, and inside the feature scale, it basically tells you what is what: boulders, hills, mountains, and continents. About 8 kilometers is set to mountains, and that's a good height. I recommend that height. Anything higher, you're okay to go with. You're okay to go with any size you want, but 8 kilometers is generally a good setting, and it's most of the time it's the preset setting. I like to make it, when I'm wanting more detail and less mountainous features, I usually just take it down to about 6 kilometers. So you can just go in here and you can delete everything out and type in 6 kilometers or just 6 km, and then that should lower it for you. But of course it's really not that different from 6.17. You can also go down lower if you want to get more mountainous features in there, but it's also going to look more like hills the further you go down. And if you look at it this way, the feature scale is more like adding more or less noise. Continents obviously have less noise because there's not as much features, it doesn't have as much detail. And you can definitely use it for continents. I mean, it does say, when it says continents, it definitely is useful for continents. I'm going to go ahead and keep it at 8 kilometers just for this tutorial. And then you can go down into the basic parameters. So what you have here is the style. You have basic, rigid, billowy. They have just different things you can choose from. And of course, rigid makes it more rigid, and billowy kind of gives it a soft and flowy hill shape, which is also pretty good to use. But then they have mixtures like smooth rigid, so it's a little bit smoother than the regular rigid, and then smooth billowy, which obviously it talks for itself. And then there's sharp rigid, and of course it's just more sharp. Flat middle kind of just makes everything flat. And then there's terraced, which it just gives a terraced look. And then Steven's choice 1, which I don't know who Steven is. He might be the developer of the program, but he always has these weird different choices in here that just look out of this world. They're kind of cool, don't get me wrong, but I like to go with the more natural looking stuff. So I usually go with rigid or billowy. Depending on what I need, I'll go with these other ones. I'm just going to go with rigid for now. Octaves is kind of the multiplier. So right here it's at auto. It's always going to be set to 10 on auto. But if you go to 1, it has less detail, kind of like the noise factor in it. It's just like you're multiplying. So if you take it all the way up, of course you have all the detail. I tend to just set it at auto. If you look at persistence, persistence is kind of like adding extra noise value. So if you slide all the way up, the terrain gets smooth. By the way, this is going to be where you're going to want to look when you're making changes. And then when you go all the way up, you're adding a bunch of noise, too much detail, or just enough detail, depending on what you want. And I believe, just like in View, I believe you can just click in here and even add more, but we'll find out. Nope, won't let you. So you're kind of limited by the sliders, though the sliders definitely add more or less, so you don't really have to worry about that. I'm going to go ahead and keep it at 0.5. That seems like a good amount. And then it's 0.531 because I clicked on this and it changed it slightly. So it has enough detail in there to make me happy. And you know what? Actually, I'll go with 0.453. That's good detail. And these, the guide levels and inputs, these aren't going to be active because we have nothing placed on these nodes. So these aren't going to be available until you get a shape guide or a lead-in level set on these nodes. And maybe in the future I'll go into that a little bit more detail. The elevation center is basically what it says. It just raises and lowers the elevation of your fractal. Keeping it at default can can be good. I recommend lowering it, especially if you're wanting to make mountains, so you get that nice smooth roll into the mountain look. When you're at the default, or not the steepness but the elevation, when you're at the default, it looks like you're in the mountain, which is cool, but we want to be out of the mountain in this tutorial, and we want to be able to look at it at a distance. So elevation we can set to like 328 meters. It doesn't seem that high, but when we import it into view, you'll see why. And then the steepness, we have it at 0.5. We can also raise and lower that. It just kind of creates the steepness of the slopes and everything like that. You can use this for like a canyon look, and then put like a filter on it to make it look terraced. Could be pretty cool. Or you can lower it and make it so it's not so steep, or you can raise it, just lower it but keep it slightly, keep some steepness in there a little bit, and you can get some nice little hills or something like that. So we're just gonna raise it a little bit to like right there, 0.375. That looks pretty good. And if we want, we could also raise this and get a little more height there as well. These right here are going to be active, though the function of them I can't really tell you in detail. Multi-scale fractal parameters, kind of, if you can understand what that means, you'll get it. I know what it does, I just can't really explain it very well, but the best way to see what it's doing to your terrain is just by looking up here. So obviously it's smoothing out the fractal just a little bit, getting a little more detail or a little bit less detail, whatever it is, fine-tuners if you want. And then of course offset kind of offsets the fractal parameters. You have this turned up, you can lower that, and then you can see the difference it makes. So it's still digging in with detail. And I don't mess with these very often. I usually get the terrain how I want it to look and then keep it that way. Lead-in levels, you have to have these set to see something. So we can, like, let's see here, let's raise these just a little bit. You can see how we're getting something else here. You can shape your terrain differently. So say you want the rocks to be on top, or like you're making a desert scene where you want rocks to be out in the sand, and so you smooth out the fractal except for certain parts in the fractal, and then you just in view you texture it as a rock. Basically what you're doing. And then you can play with it even more like this. Like if you turn the offset down all the way, you're not making hardly any changes. Turn it up just a little bit more, you're just fine-tuning the detail. And the gain obviously is the power of what you're doing in the multi-scale fractal parameters. The lead-in level is kind of like a multiplier, so you can see how it kind of multiplies the effect. I am going to stick with that one, lead-in level 3. You can change the signal type to elevation. You can kind of see how it does that. It kind of evaluates it based on elevation. By signal level, I think that's elevation and classical, and then by elevation is elevation and classical, and then there's just classical, though I'm not entirely sure on that either. But I kind of like the way by signal looked. That looks pretty good. So we're done in here for now, and they have presets up here that you can choose from. Go ahead and use those if you want. And then right here you can add more octave levels, so you can put in that and then kind of change it up, but we're not going to worry about that right now. We're going to go ahead and click OK. So now we have our basic terrain, and you can right click on this and rotate it. You kind of see what we have going on, and then you can left click and it'll change the lighting, kind of like you're moving the sun around almost. I kind of like mine a little bit more dark so I can see where the shadows are, because you have the sun or the light right above. It's kind of hard to see the details that you want, but it's all preference. So alright, and now that we have basically what we want, yours might look different than mine, so don't worry about that, just as long as you have what you want. we're going to go ahead and add another node. So just click anywhere. So you unselect that. And go ahead and bring in let's see here, a natural one. You click on natural, and this is erosion and different effects you can have on your scene, on your terrain. One of the most commonly used one is just regular erosion right here. You just click on it, and then it'll just click on it once, and it'll select it, and then you just drop it wherever, and then you should be good. Let me delete these. And then when you don't want it selected anymore, just go ahead and right click on any gray area. Just don't right click and drag, because that'll move this around. Just go ahead and just right click really quick, and it'll deselect it from your cursor. And what you want to do, in order to get this node to be active and functioning with this node, you have to select the primary output and then drag it. You just left click it once. It should have a little line that comes out like this. Go ahead and select the primary input on the erosion, and that's how the nodes work. It's just like in View almost. And that's how you would do it with any of these nodes that you want to set up. So now the advanced purlin is active with the erosion. And if you click between the two of these, you can kind of see your terrain changes a little bit. That's because the erosion right here already has an effect on the advanced purlin fractal you have right here. In here it already has it set up, the erosion base duration set to 100, the sediment carry amount to 0.2, and the filter strength to 150. This only has effect if you have a filter selected. For this tutorial we're not going to have any filters selected, but we're just going to keep it at, we're going to change it to channeled erosion. No, let's keep it on standard erosion for now. We'll just keep it on standard erosion, and then you can kind of see what it does to your terrain just a little bit. So if you click here, very slight detail changes, just very slight. So you'll be able to see fully what the erosion is doing to your terrain and the viewport while you change the parameters here. So the first step in the erosion process inside World Machine is to change the erosion base duration. For the standard erosion, it's really kind of difficult to see the settings it's making, or the effects it's making on your terrain at first. It might look like everything's getting really soft and less detailed. That's because World Machine calculates the erosion and sets sediment wherever the erosion's happening at a certain level, depending on what you chose as your erosion base duration. So if you take down the sediment carry amount and the erosion base duration, and everything, well, it's going to be set to 10 because it has to have some erosion, but say everything's set to 0, nothing's happening to your terrain. Well, since World Machine always has an erosion base duration going on, you can change the sediment carry amount. Nothing's really going to change much because there's not much erosion. But if you raise the erosion to say 120, then change the sediment carry amount, you can see World Machine is calculating it depending on how much erosion you have. So if I raise it all the way up and then continue raising the erosion base duration, you can see how much more it changes the terrain. Too much erosion and too much sediment amount can ruin a scene. You have to be really careful when you're doing that. Just fine little details is what you want with erosion. If you want to completely change your scene, make it look different, this is a good way to do it, but the longer your render is going to be in the end when you're rendering out the model. Because basically that's all World Machine's doing, is setting it up as a visual model that you can import into View or Terrigen or even Geo Control at a later time. So basically what we want right now, what I want, you can have whatever you want, but what I want is about 150 on the base duration for erosion. The sediment, I want sediment carry amount to be set at a decent level, because erosion does have sediment deposits. When something is being eroded, it emits sediment deposits. But it takes a long time to get a lot of sediment built up. So what we're going to do is raise it just a little bit to about, let's say, 2.254. and then we'll be good. Filter strength, this will have no effect on our scene at all because we don't have a filter selected right here. But it's just like a filter inside View. You can use a simple filter and then raise the filter strength. You can kind of see how that filter is affecting our terrain. It kind of makes it look like a little flat. You could probably do it for some really good sand dunes. And then there's inverse filter, which does the exact opposite. Kind of makes it a little bit more harsh. You can definitely do that for sand dunes as well. Maybe ones that have been, hit with wind repeatedly, and now there's cool little lines and designs and stuff like that. This filter does increase render times. Both of them do. And they both are purely played off of what you have set right here. But for now, I'm just going to keep it off because I don't need it. And then there's one more setting in the erosion parameters, and that's the rock hardness. Depending on how hard you want your rocks to be, it speaks for itself. When you raise this, it'll keep the sediment deposit amounts and the base duration the same, but you'll have less erosion effect on it because your rocks are really hard. The erosion's not happening very quickly. So if you raise it all the way, basically you're not having any effect on your terrain. But if you lower it, you can see how the erosion starts affecting your terrain. So you can do this as a fine tuner. Basically, that's how I look at it. I usually keep it at about 0.58 or 0.5 just by default for me, because it's a good little middle ground. You can change it to whatever you want, but I just like it as a good middle ground. It has some hardness, but not so much that it takes the erosion away. The random seed just basically changes the way the erosion appears on your terrain. So I can click this a million times, and it might look like nothing's changing, but there are small little details that are changed. And depending on what you want, it doesn't really matter. This has more of an effect when you use the filter strength and a filter. So don't worry too much about it. You can sit there and click it all day long, and it just randomly changes the way your terrain looks. The next one is geological time enhancement, and it basically sets up a multiplier. So if I enable this, you can see how much it changes the terrain. And then the erosive power, you can slide this up, and you can see the difference in your terrain, and then you can slide it down. Basically, it's doing it over thousands, maybe millions of years, even billions of years, depending on how high you go. And that's basically World Machine calculating it to see what your terrain would look like after millions of years of erosion. I don't recommend using this at a high level, maybe a smaller level, but nothing too high, because this calculates it. You have more erosion going on, more sediment carry, and everything like that, and it increases render times. And you can change it just slightly, and you might be waiting for another 30 minutes for your render to finish, whereas if you didn't have it, it would render in 5. But just use it sparingly, or I'm warning you now, it could take a long time. Could. Not saying that it will, but it could take a long time. Reconstruction type is just basically how it reconstructs the terrain and the erosion, but I usually just keep it on blended. Whatever is on there, I just keep it there. You don't really see much of a change, though. If you look further into detail and find the manual for World Machine, you might see that it does something else. But I just usually keep the reconstruction type and all these other checkboxes the same as it was when I opened it. The channeling erosion parameters, this only is active if you change the erosion method to channeled. What the channel depth is when you have channel erosion and it gets swept down by water or wind or anything like that, it creates little channels, and you probably see it all the time if you go to like the Grand Canyon or Zion's National Park in Utah. The higher the number here on the slider, the deeper the depth is on the channel. The channel is built into your terrain. Post-channeling erosion is how much sediment is built up in those channels. When I use channeled erosion, I usually set the parameters to be a little bit not as deep. Depending on the scene, I don't like them to be very deep. It could make or break a scene if they're really deep. And then I would change the post-channeling erosion to something like 34% post. And that's a good amount. When you go into channel, when you're walking through parks and stuff like that, and you happen to get into those big erosion channels, there's a lot of sediment in there, but it's not filled up. You know, you're not walking through, you know, a body's worth of sand and sediment. You're only walking through enough that make you footsteps, basically. So even 34% post is a lot. It's more like, you know, 10 to 25 is more understandable and reasonable. But you can get whatever you want on there. So, but we're not going to be using channeled erosion unless you are while following along. Definitely do it if you want. Everything is the same for channeled erosion minus this last little part right here, and it's specific to channeled erosion. So now we're done with that. I'll go ahead and click OK, and you can come back over here and see what your train looks like. It might not look like it changed a lot, but it really did. So if I go ahead and disconnect this node, so I just click right here and then it's disconnected, I can go ahead and what we want to do is set up the scene to render out at the resolution we want before we actually render out a preview. What you want to do is left click on the world extents and resolution, and in here you can change the resolution of the scene, basically, of your render. In view, you want to uncheck the +1 right here. It just adds an extra pixel to the scene, and some programs require that, but view doesn't. And this is the resolution right here. The slider is basically the resolution, and it can go up to 8192 by 8192. But view handles 4096 by 4096, so that would be the highest you'd be able to go to for view purposes. For preview purposes, I would recommend 1024 or 2048. And then when you're ready to do a final render of the scene and then export it, I would do 4096. And also what you want to do is check conserve memory, and what that will do is it'll speed up the render times of your scene, and it won't save any temporary data in the files or anything like that, and it'll just speed up the render. And for slower machines, I recommend clicking on that and enabling that option. I'm gonna go ahead and set it to 2048 by 2048, and then click OK. And then make sure you have this checked, and click build. And what World Machine will do is go ahead and build your scene, and then you can click on this. This is the 3D preview render, and this basically gives you a 3D view of your terrain. So you can see I have some mountains, kind of Rocky Mountain looking. Right here, these lines right here, these are very unnatural. They basically come from the multiplier settings inside the fast purlin, and I can go in and change that. Basically, this area is losing too much detail, and it makes the scene look weird. Of course, from down here you can't really tell, but up above, if you're doing up above render shot, mountains don't have these straight lines. So I would go back by clicking on the device view right here, or pressing F5, going back in here and then lowering the gain, or raising the gain, sorry. Or I can just lower the activity and the offset and the gain, and then click OK. And now you can see they're not as prominent, there's a little more detail in them, but they're still there, and that just might be the fractal that I have. You can go in and change that by basically changing the transformation here. You click on this and it does a live transformation change. This is basically what you're doing inside view when you're changing the parameters inside the fractal. This is basically what you're doing. It's just basically moving it across the giant field. You can see that field by clicking on the I believe it's the Explorer view, and this Explorer view is your entire fractal that you've created, and it's just rendering out this little part inside the box. If you right click and drag up, it'll raise it, and if you drag down, it'll lower it, just the camera, and then you can kind of get an idea of what your fractal's looking like from above. Of course, you don't want a big one like this, it would just look like a swampland, but down here, as a single mountain, this looks pretty good. The layout view gives you an above view, so you can zoom in using your mouse, and basically it's the same thing, it just gives you a bird's eye view straight down on it. and this is the entire fractal. It keeps going and going and going. So you can do this to find out if there's something close by that looks more interesting than what you're rendering out now. I recommend using the layout generator. That's very helpful. So like say I wanted to use this part, World Machine will actually give me the coordinates of it right above the mouse. I don't believe you can click and drag, but basically I would recommend doing this to get a basic layout of what your terrain looks like. Other than that, I'm sorry for going off topic. Let me go back here. There's one more view. There's a 2D view, but that's just what it renders out, and it's 2D, not high resolution at all. So go back to your node layout, and now we have a different mountain scene here. Same erosion when I connect it, but a different mountain scene. I'll go ahead and build it, and you can see that the 2048 by 2048 doesn't take long to render at all, depending on your machine. So here's my mountain views. Look pretty good in my opinion. I think they look pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and go back to my nodes and then connect the erosion. Now you can see the effects of the erosion. Go ahead and build it. The erosion will take a little bit longer to render, especially when you have it connected, and it'll just take a couple minutes to render. And when it's done rendering, what you basically want to do is the exact same thing. Look at the 3D view of it and see if you like it. If not, go back and change some parameters and make sure it's just fine-tune it to what you like. In World Machine, sometimes it will render it out once as kind of like a post-render thing. I'm not entirely sure what it is. And then it'll render it out again. But the second time, it usually goes by a little bit quicker. I'm not entirely sure why it does that. I've never bothered to look into it because it's never really bothered me. But when you have a lot of erosion and you set it to 4096, the resolution, and that second pass comes around, the first one might take forever, and then the second one won't take nearly as long, but it still takes forever. So you have to be really, really careful when it comes to your erosion. Especially when you have like 6 or 7 other nodes out here, it has to build every single one of those. So you gotta be careful with what you set up and make sure your system can handle it first. So then when it's done, all you have to do is click OK and then look at it. And standard erosion, there's some effect to our terrain. We don't have a lot of sediments piling up. We can go in and change that if you want. I would prefer a little bit more sediment deposit. And these channels right here, those are the erosions. This is not channeled erosion, by the way. But you can see the effects that the erosion has on our terrain. This might be too much erosion, so we can go back and then just go in there and change it. So we can change the erosion duration down to like 100, and then raise the sediment amount, and then raise the rock hardness. Not all the way, of course. We don't want it all the way. To about right there. And then we might, let's go ahead and raise this to like 120. And then build it one more time. Alright. Nope. Up. Down there. And there we go. We got a little bit more sedimentation right here. A little bit more rock hardness. I guess we can take down the rock hardness. I'll probably take these channels away. Other than that, I'm going to keep it like this. This looks pretty good. And then we're going to go ahead and set up the output nodes for it. So you can output it, export it out, and then import it into view. What you want to do is, if you like it anyways, go back and change anything if you don't. But what you're going to want to do is go back to your node view, click on output, click on this red floppy disk. It's the hide output. Go ahead and click on that and drag just like you would over. What you want to do in here is double click on the hide output, and then choose for the terrain only the terrain output. Put it on TIFF 16-bit, the high precision 16-bit plus. We don't want it on this, so this wouldn't have the detail we need. We need it on the 16 just for the terrain. The reason why I say TIFF or TIFF, is because Vue handles that file really well, especially when you're using a procedural terrain to basically project what you just made in World Machine. You can use a standard terrain and use like a PNG or Pavre, or Pavre, TG, or Targa, whichever one you want to call it. But TIFF, if you're going to use a procedural terrain inside Vue to project what you made in World Machine, and that's what I would recommend doing. And after you do that, you want to click on Set, save it wherever you want, and name it whatever you want. It's a little bit too long. Click on Save, click OK, and then before you do anything, raise it, the 4096, if you want to. If you think your machine can handle it, go ahead, click OK, and then make sure you have the height output selected, and then click Build. And it'll take a lot longer to do the erosion at 4096. It has to do a lot of calculations, and it'll take a very long time. So if you have a fast computer, just wait a couple minutes or seconds or whatever. But if you have a slow computer, I would recommend going and grabbing a drink and then coming back. Okay, so after your render is complete at 4096, if you did anyways, you're more than welcome to export it. I would recommend going into the 3D view and looking at it. Right now it might not seem like it's much different from the 2096, but there is one feature in the 3D view that I failed to mention to you. If you want to see a full detail shot of it, click on the camera right here, and that will load up a full detail snapshot of it. Sometimes it'll last, sometimes World Machine is kind of buggy sometimes, but you can see a full detail here of what it looks like. If it's too much detail, or if it's not what you like, go back and change. Wait through the render again. Fortunately, you have to, and then go back and look at it. Just continue doing that till you find something you like, and then when you finally get something you like, go ahead and export it. When you do the detail snapshot and then you move it, it'll take away that snapshot. So that's normal. Don't freak out if that happens. So let's go ahead and go back, and after you render that really long final render, don't click on anything else. I'm warning you right now, do not click on anything else except for the device view, because then you won't have to re-render the model again. You can just go ahead and double click on the height output and click Write Output to Disk, and it'll say it was written successfully, and then click OK. If it didn't say that, then you clicked somewhere or you did something that made World Machine hate you, and now it wants you to suffer through the really long render again. Then you'll just have to go ahead and re-render it again, and then double click and then write output to disk. After you do that, you can save your project file. I would recommend doing that, but if you don't want to, or you're just doing this as like a test to see if you like it, just go ahead and click the X button and then just close World Machine. The next thing you want to do is open up Vue. Depending on the version you have, it'll be a little bit different, but I'll pretty much do it basically the same way you do it in any other Vue version of Vue. So if you exported it as a TIF file or a TIFF file, go ahead and create a procedural terrain. When you do that, go ahead and just double click on procedural terrain. If you have Vue 9 or above, the brush editor right here, I believe it's 9 and above, it could be other ones as well. Just go ahead and close that, we don't need it. Right click on your altitude production, click edit function, go ahead and select everything in there and just delete them. Next, go ahead and bring in the texture map node, connect it to the altitude, grayscale output, and then from here you want to click on the file input button, click on the browse file button, and then look for your file. If it's TIFF file, you'll see it right here as a little grayscale map. Go ahead and click on it, click open. Next what we want to do is change the interpolation type to bicubic, and the difference between setting it to none or bicubic is when you put a texture on it, it'll screw up your textures, trust me, or it'll give you some kind of artifacts that you aren't going to want. And then after that, go ahead and click OK. Now that should be in here. One thing before I do anything else, someone asked me where the zero edges button is. It's right here. This is the zero edges button. Go ahead and click on that, and it'll take away the zero edges, and now you have your terrain that you made in World Machine. There is something weird about World Machine where the terrains look a lot higher than what they actually are when you input them, or while you're making them in World Machine. But in View, they're not nearly as tall or wide-spanned as they are in World Machine, and that's something that is with World Machine's settings, not necessarily views. So be aware of that as well. And then in here, if you want the zero edges on, go ahead and keep it on. If not, go ahead and uncheck it, and then raise your resolution. But before I do that, one more time, I'm going to go ahead and here. And somebody else asked me where the Rocky Mountain fractal option is. When you have your fractal node here, it's going to be this drop down window, and it's going to be Rocky Mountains or Eroded Rocky Mountains, but you have to have View 9 and above in order to have Rocky Mountain options, because that's when they're made and put into View. But if you want to get Rocky Mountains, you can use the Terrain Fractal. You just have to tweak the settings, and I believe I have a tutorial up where I explain that. If not, please let me know. Other than that, those are the two questions that needed to be answered. Then raise your resolution to what you exported it as, which mine was 4096. And that should be good. Wow. It generates the mesh. Alright. Once it's done generating the mesh, go ahead and click OK. And I'll do it one more time. Just give it a minute. Alright. Next, what we have is our terrain. Then what you want to do is change the size of the terrain roughly to what you had it in World Machine. So if you set it to 8 kilometers inside the Advanced Purlin node, I would recommend changing it to 8 kilometers, though you're not limited to that. Just kind of raise it to be a little bit bigger, because you're going to want a nice actual sized mountain. And this is just a texture map node, so the procedural terrain that's being used to produce this is limited by 4096. So you don't get those small details that you get on a regular procedural terrain. Though depending on the terrain you made in World Machine, you should have good detail or you'll have bad detail. It just comes down to whether or not how your terrain looked inside World Machine and you had exactly what you wanted. So it all comes down to what you had in World Machine. If it doesn't look good, but you still want to keep it and experiment with it, you're more than welcome to do that. Also, with the importation of World Machine terrains, sometimes, not all the time, there is this cutoff right here. That is, it's an error in World Machine and View, and some kind of importing error. I'm not entirely sure how to fix it or what it is, so I would research that. I've always just kind of went into the procedural terrain, and all I did was raise the clipping range, because there's a lot of this small stuff in here that I don't necessarily want. So that's one way you can fix it. It doesn't always solve that issue. Most of the time you're just gonna have to hide it from the render, unfortunately. So that's one way you can fix it. I'm not too interested in fixing it, so I'm just gonna cancel it. And now you can do whatever you basically want. or what you usually do in View, which is apply really good textures to it. So I'm just going to do a quick and easy one here. That one. And then lower that. Maybe, if it'll work. Come on. There we go. I like the grass and rock texture. It's pretty nice sometimes. You can get some good looking mountain ranges and bluffs off of it. And now that you have what you want, you just position your camera to where you want it. You get some cool little slopes in there. And then just add an atmosphere. Sound mirage. There we go. So that concludes the tutorial on inputting terrains, creating terrains and inputting them into View. This next one will be how to do it in Geo Control. And Geo Control isn't necessarily a node-based world generator, and we'll go ahead and delve into that right now. If you own Geo Control 2 or just Geo Control, go ahead and open it. If not, you can skip the tutorial or end it, and then come back. I don't know what the minutes will be in it, because there's going to be something at the end of this video that I'm going to want to show you. Just kind of skip around. I'll mark it in the video. So for Geo Control 2 users who want to import their terrains into View, everything you do at the beginning dictates what you do. I would set the dimensions to 4096 by 4096 right now. You can set the width and height of the terrain here. I would set the height to at least 8 kilometers. And the width is already freaking huge. You can lower it or raise it. Geo Control is really good for making really long mountain ranges, because you can set the width to some ridiculous number and have a really good mountain range. So I'm going to raise that to the 40,000. Or, let's see here. Come on. I know you want to. Oops. Okay. 40,000. There we go. Alright, so now you have the dimensions set, the terrain size to 4096 by 4096. You have your width and height set to what you want. Go ahead and click generate and let it generate. It'll take a while if you set to 4096. Trust me, you're going to want to generate it now and not later. And then go ahead and click on ISO lines, or ISO lines, whichever way you want to say it. And I'll say, do you want to start on an empty terrain? Go ahead and click yes. Now this is where Geo Control kind of separates itself from the pack, because instead of using nodes or randomly generated terrains with other nodes to form your shapes and your terrains, you basically draw them out in Geo Control by using ISO lines. Use these 3 options down here. Use this pen tool, use this eraser, and use this selector. If you hover over them, it should actually just give you a name, but it never does for me for some reason. But basically what you want to do is start on the first layer, ISO 0. You can rename it if you want. I would start with this, make sure it's selected, and then I always just kind of visualize what I want my mountain range to look like from the top down. So from here, I kind of want to draw a mountain range that kind of goes like this, and then that's it. Then I click generate. Up here, it'll generate it. Down here, it'll tell you what it's doing. And when this is done, you'll see what you have. It kind of looks a little weird right now. Kind of looks like there's an ocean with a little sandbar that goes across it. But that's because the ISO line has its own values. You have to make sure you select the ISO line after you generate it, or else you won't be able to change anything. The values that the ISO line holds are the height, and the levels. If you have an 8-kilometer terrain size, 1880 isn't going to be very tall. It's going to be very small, and you can probably use this as an ocean sandbar. What you're going to want to do is raise this number to fairly to what you want. You can see the colors change right here and right here. When it starts getting into the browns and the dark grays, that's generally a good range for mountains. All the way up is, of course, the highest peak. It's going to be really flat, and it's the highest your terrain's going to be. I usually wouldn't go that high. I'll drop it down to about this dark gray color is where I usually put it, and then I hit generate one more time. Of course, it'll take a minute for it to generate, and when it does, you'll see that you have your terrain set to the height that you want it. You can also click on 3D right here. It'll change it to a 3D view, and that also just takes a minute. It has to do a little bit more because it has to do shadows and stuff like that. And then in the render option right here, you can change the camera to wherever you want it. You can't change it necessarily in here. I wish you could, but you can't. You have to do that later. But you can usually get the gist of what you're making inside this. And so the next thing that the easel line has as a setting are these levels. And these dictate the level, the amount of detail you have, and how much level the fractal has. Lowering these like that takes away the sharp details. So you can see this little line right here that kind of goes across, and it's very much there, I guess you can say. If I should lower those and I click generate, you can see the terrain change all on its own. Just gotta do the shadows. And now you can see that that line goes away. It's a little bit more flat. Say you want a peak. You want mountain peaks. Well, just raise that. Click generate. Of course, it'll just take another couple minutes. And there you go. You can add more detail as you go. Of course, you can raise these all the way as well, so you can get a little bit more of those smaller details in there as you go down. You can get really good looking terrains and really bad looking terrains if you change these options. I recommend only playing around with them because I'm not the best, I'm not gonna lie, I'm not the best at explaining what exactly these do. You get a really good explanation on Geo Control's website. I can't remember his name. I think he's German. He has an accent, but he speaks really good English. He gives out the best tutorials on how to explain these. There's not a lot on them. Some of them are very vague. They don't go into a lot of detail on how things work. But he at least gives a slight introduction to easel lines and how to use them properly. But say, for example, I don't want a mountain range. What I can do is go back to... No, I want to go back to easel lines, and I just want to oops, my bad. Remove clear layer, I think is what you want to do, and then generate. So now we have a clear palette. If you don't want a full mountain range, all you really have to do is make a little nick like that, and then generate. And what Geo Control 2 does is basically it just calculates around the easel line, so like that. You can create an island, or you can create a single mountain, whatever you want to do. Of course, the height is still there. You still have to make sure the height is there. It's set to the amount you want, so maybe a little bit higher. This is a really good opportunity to see exactly what these layers levels do. And you can basically see the easel line I created. You see how you can see the easel line right there. You can take that down about right here. Keep some good detail there, of course, but you can take away that easel line, like the strict easel line, and create a peak, a natural looking peak. It just takes a couple minutes. And then, after you have what you want, you can go into filter. And this is my favorite part. In the filter, you have options to add. Add, change, remove, up, down, basically what you would use on a regular basis in other programs. If you want to change what you have on there, you just click change. And remove, and then you can move the selected device up or down. What you want to do first is click on add. And there's a filter browser, which shows you what different filters are and what they do. So like height correction, it gives you some options for like different heights that it could use to correct different things. Slope smoothing, presets for slope smoothing, presets for glaciation, presets for canyons, you know, everything. Just anything your heart desires, or not really desires, but anything that Geo Control has that has settings and presets for it. There's zero edge, which is my favorite one to use, and then there's just the add noise. But anything that Geo Control 2 has as a filter is in here that you can see a preset for. What I usually do is I usually go to general forming and use zero edge. I don't have to do that with this single mountain, because if I do that, it takes away these details I want down here. But after I use zero edges, I usually go to shape filters, and I'll add mountains rigid or mountains full rigid, and I'll show you what those look like, and then cross hairs. But I'm just going to go to mountains full rigid and click generate, and it will generate everything that I could possibly want or use or need. Anyways, I'm just talking crap right now. It's been a long tutorial. Shadows is usually the last thing. And there we go. Basically, I took my little mountain and gave it ridges. That's basically all it did. Makes it look, it gives it a little bit exactly what it says, a shape. It gives it a shape. And you can go into the settings and change them. So if you don't want these to be all rough and rugged and rigid, you can bring the slope smoothing up and ridge reducing down, and then regenerate, and you'll still have some ridges, but they're not going to be as prominent. And that's what I recommend for this preset, because it can be really noisy sometimes. It looks really cool, but it can be noisy, and you have to be careful with that. So I typically increase the slope smoothing, and I might have increased it a little bit too much, but I'll increase it a little bit, and then I'll lower the ridge. I'll lower the number for ridge reducing. But you can also change the general strength of the filter, which will add a lot, and I really mean it'll add a lot of noise. So you have to change this in minuscule amounts. Don't change it drastically, and don't raise it or lower it drastically. You gotta have small amounts to see what you want. I would recommend doing that. Unlike in View, though, you can't change these values to be more than what the preset value is. So unfortunately, you're limited by that. If you can't get the shape you want by changing these two values, you can change the general strength. But remember, just change it slightly. Don't change it drastically, minuscule amounts. And then re-render. And Geo Control is really easy to get something really great looking, and I like Geo Control 2 a little bit more than World Machine. I like World Machine for its erosion strength, and Geo Control has erosion as well. but you can actively change the erosion in World Machine and see exactly what you're getting right on the fly. You can't do that in Geo Control. So those are the two strengths that I find in both programs. So if I make a terrain in here, I'll import it into World Machine, I'll do the erosion in World Machine, and then import it into View, and then use rendering power to render out a nice scene. I'm not going to say like View's terrains are horrible, because they're really great. Matter of fact, I like them more than Geo Controls or World Machine. But sometimes you can't get what you want easily or fast in View like you could in Geo Control or World Machine. So that's why I would use them. Now in Geo Control, you can add more than one filter. Matter of fact, don't even have to add them in any certain order. So say I want to add mountains full rigid, like I did, but then I want more smoothing, and I want to control the smoothing a little bit more than what the options give me in the mountains full rigid. I just go to valley or slope smoothing, and then generate it, and it'll smooth out the terrain a little bit more for me. And it could take away a lot of detail. It could take exactly the amount I want away. You just have to play with the settings. There's no simple way of explaining it. You just have to play with the settings, and we'll go ahead and do that after it's done applying the smoothing. And Geo Control also has to go through the multiple levels of doing it. It goes one level at a time. So I'll start with 256, then 512, then 128, then 246, and then finally 4096. So the renders go by a little bit slow sometimes, depending on the resolution you chose. So this right here could be really interesting. You can have rock formations picking out of sand, or you can have rock formations picking out of snow. There's a lot of smoothing going on down here, and it kind of blends going up. You can actually change the way that smoothing is applied by changing the angle. By default it's set to 45, and the values here are, you know, they're kind of subjective. Anyway, I don't think it does it in degrees. You just have to play with it to get the feel you want. So at 45, I'm going to change it to 55, so about 10 up, and then click Gen. And you can see how that changes the terrain. Instead of the slope appearing just at any one level, it's appearing now down here and up here depending on the angle. Let's say you don't want smoothing to take place at the top at that angle, you would just have to change it to higher or lower. And like I said, it's a little bit subjective. It doesn't really describe where it's taking precedence. So it was on 45, I'm going to lower it to 20, go click generate, and see how that looks. And as you can see, changing it down to 20 kind of gives it more of a practical use. Still looks like a mountain, and it's getting smooth in areas where you'd want it to be smooth. But of course it all comes down to what you want. If you want it to be a little bit more smooth further up, just change the angle. You can also change the blending, and that's basically the transition from where it's smoothing into the mountain and how much it blends in. So the higher it is, of course it blends a little bit more. The lower it is, the less it blends. That's just very simple. I'm going to go ahead and raise this to about 30, right in there. And I'm going to change the blending to be further down to about 40, and then generate it. Right, now it's complete. Not that I hate the way this looks, I just like the way the other one looked more. A little bit more blending, kind of a little bit more natural looking. So I'm just going to go ahead and change it to 20, and then change this back to 50. And then you can just kind of see what the differences are. And you just small changes can change the terrain a great amount. So just small changes and just play with it to find what you want. I can sit here and try to explain it to you all day, but it just comes down to playing with it in practice. So we'll just go ahead and generate it one more time and get it back to where I want it. Alright, now it's complete. And say I want to add just one more thing on here, and it can be erosion, Could be another shape filter. Maybe I want to give it some terraces. Who knows? But I actually want to change it, or give one more to, these would look really weird with the mountains ridged. I'm probably not going to add another one, so never mind. Let's go to general forming, see if there's anything here that might look good. And unfortunately I don't have enough time to go over each and every one of these, but by all means, if you want to see a certain filter, go ahead and ask me about it, and I'll try my best to explain it to you and make a tutorial about it. Don't be afraid to ask for anything regarding Geo Control, World Machine, or View. If I can do it, I'll make sure you can understand it. I'm going to put some glaciation in, kind of, a glacier mountain. That'd be pretty cool. Let's go ahead and do that. Give it a good little effect, and I believe that'll add more smoothing at the lower base. We'll just have to play with it, make sure it doesn't make it look unnatural. And as you can see, the glaciation kind of gives it that cutoff down here, which can be good or bad. It can actually make or break the scene, because when you import it into View, you'll have this noticeable circle around your terrain. And if you want it to blend in with the ground or have the textures blend in together, you don't want this noticeable circle. So you can change the blending. I believe you might want to blend it more, and then change the height of the glaciation down. And you, depending on these values, you can actually just completely eliminate the glaciation effect. And you can change the ground height. But it's not looking like something I want, so I'm just going to go ahead and remove it. And then regenerate it. Alright, so you got the mountains I want. I think I am pretty much done. Inside Geo Control you can actually render out the scene. Get a camera look, get some post-rendering options here. But I don't want to do that right now. I might later go in at a later time in another tutorial and show them. But I want to import this into View. And Geo Control, at least Geo Control 2, I'm not sure about the first one, actually has a really good option. You go to Generation, Terrain Export, and TIFF 16 Grayscale for displacement in the View procedural terrain function. All you do is you click on that. It's the preset value. Just save it where you want. Save it as any name you want. Click Save, and it'll generate the terrain. You can save the file and come back to it later, or you can close it, and then it'll say you should clear the temp folder of the project name, and then press no if that project is still running. So I want to click no and close the program, and I'm going to take that out because I don't need it anymore. Go ahead and open up View again, or if it's still open, just leave it open, and go ahead and generate another procedural terrain. Open up the function editor and edit the function, just the same way you did in World Machine. Oh, not that. That. Grayscale. We want to import the file. And again, we want to set the bicubic. Click OK. And again, we want to take off 0 edges. We want to raise the resolution of the file. And in Geo Control, you can definitely add the erosion inside Geo Control. They have a fast erosion process in there that literally only takes like a couple minutes to render out. But it's basically the same thing inside World Machine. The more sedimentation, the more erosion, the longer the render time, and everything like that. So you got to be very careful. And that would kind of help alleviate. Geo Control usually has these weird, grainy, really noisy peaks when it generates its filters, depending on the filter, of course, and the filter strength. And the erosion system can actually help in alleviating that problem and make it more natural looking. I would recommend doing that. You can actually fix that inside World Machine as well. So say I didn't want to use the erosion system inside Geo Control because one in World Machine is a lot more convenient. You can go ahead and open up World Machine, and you're going to do this for any file that you make inside View as well, that you want erosion on your terrain. Basically, you want to go to the generator and click on the file input node, drag it in, double click on it, click on load, and then find your terrain wherever it's at, right there. Click open, and it'll load it into World Machine, and it's going to look a little more funky inside World Machine than it did in Geo Control and View. It's going to look a lot taller. There's something inside World Machine that you can change to make it look more natural than what you had it before. I just don't know what it is or where to find it. But anybody who knows, definitely fill me in, and I'll make sure to point it out next time. So we input it with the file input. And let's go ahead and add erosion. Connect the two. And then let's go ahead and make a channeled erosion, just for the sake of this part. Go ahead and raise the erosion process. I'm going to raise the rock hardness to a little higher level, and I want to raise the sediment carry amount to about right there. And then I'm just going to randomize it a few times. And then I want the depth to be a little bit deeper with a little bit of post. And then click OK. And then you're going to want the output file. Connect it there. And then you want to make sure you set the world extents. 4096. Click OK. Make sure you conserve memory. Click OK. And then make sure you have this set to the TIFF, 16-bit. Set it to the right place you want to save it at. Click OK. And then render it out. And when it's done with the erosion, all you have to do is make sure it's something that you like by coming into your 3D view and then taking a look. And remember, it's going to look fairly different inside World Machine than it will in View. I don't know why, but it will. So you do a full screen snapshot, or full preview, quality preview, sorry. And yeah, it's a really quick little channel erosion set on there, so it's not too grand, but you kind of see what you got. And then go ahead and go back to your node here and write the output of the disk. And you're basically going to do that for every terrain that you set up in View. So you can do it both ways. When you want to have just your regular terrain that you have from Geo Control or World Machine, go ahead and import into View. When you make your terrain in View, go ahead and import it into World Machine. You can do it in Geo Control. I'll get into that at a later time. In World Machine, you can add other effects. You can even add more Perlin Fractal. You can even add erosion. So you literally can do whatever you want. I'm gonna go ahead and delete this, and I'm going to re-add the eroded one, because that one, not that. God damn it. There we go. Because I actually, sorry, it'll keep the file you had up. You just gotta reload the file. So I'll just do that. And it's this one. Click OK. Bicubic still, alright. Alright, and we got the eroded one inside of View, and you can kind of see what you have. Go ahead and click OK, and then click, after it loads up the OpenGL mesh, make sure you resize the terrain fairly to the size that you had in Geo Control, of course. Of course, you don't have to do it the exact same size, but I'd recommend getting at least around the same size that you had it rendered in Geo Control. Remember when you set the height when we made the easel lines? And now you have a cool little mountain that you made in Geo Control, and you can get some good looks. I'm not gonna lie. Geo Control it does a pretty good job at rendering out mountains. My favorite thing to do after doing just a single mountain like this, I like to make it look really rocky and grassy. So and rocky and snowy, or rocky and sandy. So I'm gonna go ahead and roll in some quad spinner stuff here. They're pretty good. I'm gonna use some earthy looking material, and then I'm gonna mix it with sand. So that brown sand right there. And in view 10, it's going to be a little bit different the way you go about doing this. You're going to have to go to Influence of Environment and click on Distribution of Materials again, like you do normally in any other version. And then we want this sand to appear at low altitudes. Make that a little bit stronger on flat surfaces. Make that a little bit stronger. You don't have to have them equal, that's just how I do it. And then you can see where these materials are being placed by checking these nodes. Then let it render out over here. You can see the rock, what is that? Minor night or whatever. I don't know how to read it. It's only appearing at the top right there. So we want to go here and decrease this amount. Now you can see it appearing right there. Decrease it a little bit more. And now it's appearing right there. Alright, so then we can go back to the influence of material, change this to be less. See how that looks. Okay, that's too much. About 60. A little bit too much. Still 70. 70 looks good. Change that. That looks too much. 90. So we really want it to appear at low altitudes. And then we really want it to appear on flat surfaces. It's like 80. Even more, 90. Or maybe a little bit less. 80. We'll go with 80. There we go. And then we'll just increase that a little bit more. Alright. Next thing we can do is uncheck these. And this is all the terrain made in Geo Control. So, no tricks here. We load up a good atmosphere. Change the settings in this one particularly because it tends to overdo it on the quality and it doesn't even need it that much. Click OK. Now it should go by a little bit faster. And then reap the rewards of your beautiful terrain that you made in Geo Control. Sometimes they're good looking, sometimes they're bad. It just depends on your knowledge of Geo Control and playing around and getting used to it. So I would recommend playing around and getting used to it. It's just the only thing you can do. Other than that, that's basically all I want to cover right now anyways. The rest is kind of up to you, whether or not what your atmosphere looks like or what textures you use and everything like that. But if you do have any issues or problems or you have questions, definitely ask. I'm not going to bite your hand off. I'm not your mother. You can ask me questions. My goodness. There are a few things that I would like to go over just slightly in a future tutorial, but right now we're running out of time. So thank you for viewing this tutorial. I really appreciate it, and make sure you comment and like and fave or whatever all that crap is. Definitely post comments. Appreciate it. Thanks.